Alright, me. It is almost October. It might even be October at this point. And I've just finished reading Life, Universe, and Everything by Douglas Adams. It is the third book in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. Certainly this one took me longer than it should have to read. I mean, I've read it all in one day today, but because of teaching and everything, it just took me a lot longer to get to start reading it. Technically, I've read 2 other books in the meantime. I want to go back and actually read the full version of those. So hopefully that'll be the next very, very soon. But that's that. On Life, Universe, and Everything, the big thing here, philosophically wise, is the focus on time, right? Time gets explored a lot, mostly through time travel, but then also through, time distortion, but then also through, coincidences through time, and how do we feel about those things. That's kind of the major point. Before we get into that part, the book kind of leads off with this concept of, we've gone from series-wise, from the improbability driving everything to they call bistro mathematics, which is a really funny thing, but also a very, very true thing, in which somehow, some way, the numbers just don't seem to work the same way when you're in, and like you're in a bistro, or like you're in a restaurant, you're trying to pay with a group of people. Like, it just doesn't work the same way. The math just doesn't, the numbers do weird things somehow. And yes, I know it is technically all just algebra. In reality, it's a very simple thing, but it doesn't feel simple while you're doing it, right? And it's kind of the crux of the whole thing. The reason why I find this shift interesting is because of the time travel aspect that we get into later, right? Because from a standpoint, right, is the idea that if time travel were to exist, it were to have always existed, right? From arguably, I would argue from a fundamental standpoint, because there is, once it has been invented, there is no limit as to where you can then travel, therefore making it accessible to everyone at all points in time, right? And so, if time travel were to exist, I would argue that it would have always existed, right? Which then also, in my argument, I would say that then, once time travel has been invented, there is no more development because of the same thing. Because once something has been developed, or innovated, or invented, it could be brought back and then used from that point in time, which then means it doesn't have to be developed or invented, right? As this kind of weird endless cycle of things. So, time's a tricky thing, and time's a fickle thing, right? But time travel wise, they kind of explore this a lot, quite a bit, of where, all of this book really happens in one afternoon. All the things that Arthur and Ford and Slartibartfast all get into all happens within one afternoon, of where they go and chase after the Chesterfield. They get transported to Lord's Cricket Ground. they go out, they do the entirety of the book, and then they come back to the Lord's cricket ground at the same point that they started off with, right? So all of this happens within one afternoon, theoretically. And it's just one of those weird little fascinating things to me of like, once you introduce the idea or even concept of being able to manipulate time, then time stops meaning anything, right? And from a philosophical perspective, right, I would argue that that's kind of the same thing of like, because time is inherently, as we experience it, a linear thing, although mentally it can be exponential, but because that's how we experience it, it only goes one way. The entire concept of a philosophical standpoint of like being able to either stop that or reverse that, then throws everything out of balance, right? And we even get that a little bit with I don't remember his name, but character who is granted immortality in this book, and as it says, through a freak accident. So he's not born innately with it. It's thrust upon him, right? He suddenly becomes an immortal being in the world. And at first he thinks it's fun, it's enjoyable, but then he fizzles out of it, because inherently our concept of any living creature's being of time and of existence is that it's inherently limited by the fact that we are going to die, right? And that linearly and exponentially we are going to experience time, but only in one way. And therefore, once you take that away, our mental capacity cannot inherently reshift its focus, right? And so we have to find ways to keep ourselves busy. And how this person keeps himself busy after he's done partying and doing all the other stuff is, well, he wants to insult every single person in the world in alphabetical order, visit them all, right? Because there's nothing else for him to do in his life, right? This is the one thing that is still a challenge and will still give him something to work through, right? But in terms of like technology and philosophy and learning, that can only get you so far in life, right? That can only, in eternity, that can only get you so far, especially when you start looking at things like how they have the earworms, the babblefish, right? And that takes off a huge portion of like having to learn language and things, right? Because you inherently immediately understand and it translates for you, which then means that a huge chunk of learning doesn't have to happen, right? So, once you get through all the media and all the reading, well, then what's left other than just go and try to insult every single being that has ever existed, right? Because not only are you immortal, but you can jump through time, right? So what else are you going to do with all that? So that's that. We also explore time a little bit through, what are the other ones we explored through? I mean, that was mostly just the time travel one. We'll talk about the coincidences one, right? Along those similar lines, we have the conversation and talk about coincidences and how those work in this world. And we have this one creature, a Jarbith, I think off the top of my head. I know it's an A name, but we have this one character that has been tormented by Arthur Dent for his entire life because it is a... You want to start coughing now? Okay. It's a being that has recognized that it reincarnates, but in every single life it is killed by Arthur Dent, right? This tiny little guy that throughout all the story gets ignored or like doesn't inherently matter to this one creature. Arthur Dent means the world, right? And you know, this constant, you know, every single life he has ever lived somehow ends at the hands of Arthur Dent. Right, he was the bowl of petunias that got dropped to the earth in the first book. He was the rabbit that gets killed at the very beginning of this, as well as the fly at the very beginning of this, while Arthur Dent is still in his cave 2 million years in prehistoric times. You know, it's that's my cat. It's just really one of those interesting of like where you think about time and like your constant run-ins with one specific thing over and over and over again. At one point, does that turn from something that is just happening to you to an obsession, to, you know, something that has to dominate your life, right? And then we get this idea explored even more when it comes to the crickets and when it comes to, they have a really weird name. I don't remember the name, but it's two races of creatures that are so singularly focused on war that like everything else gets dropped for a significant amount of time, right? Because that's what they can focus on. You know, at what point does your liking of doing something because you're good at it become an obsession because that's all you're good at, right? And then with that, we go back to the crickets. We have this fun little thing of where cricket is a race of people that attempted to destroy the entire universe. And then there's like a key and a whole bunch of stuff. I don't remember all the exact details of it, but the joke is that humans in their primitive state play the game or have made a game out of the cricket's initial world-ending plan, which we then call cricket, right? With that being explored, though, we have this idea that like the crickets get like locked up onto their home planet in time distortion, in which they only experience 5 years, but the rest of the galaxy experiences, you know, 200,000 or whatever, how many years it is, right? And even in that short amount of time in which they have been forced to go back and only be by themselves, they realize that, oh yeah, this is the whole destroying the universe thing isn't actually going to be good, right? Because we realize that we have these other things that we want to be doing. We want to have sport leagues. We want to, you know, we care about ecology, and all those things get destroyed if we also give into this obsession of destroying the world. And so, you know, we have this huge thing of where the cricket people eventually decide, this isn't what is good for us anymore. But yeah, let's see what else. You know, it's a fun series. It's a fun collection of books. I really enjoy them. You have to do a lot of suspension of like trying to learn things and everything, you know, which is fair, right? It's a science fiction book that does not care about humans, right? So it's a lot of working through everything. Did I ever get back to my point on time travel? I don't think I ever did, right? The point I tried to make at the beginning of why I found it interesting that we switched to this different level of bistro mathematics is that if everything is invented at all times, everywhere, because of the existence of time travel, right? The existence and the need for the improbability drive that was needed in the first two books shouldn't have been needed, because there was this much cleaner, much easier version that's much faster as well in bistro mathematics that exists, right? And with time travel, inherently you wouldn't need the improbability drive because you have the bistro mathematics. So that's that. You know, part of it is that there's, within the concept of time travel, is that time has to be both linear, exponential, and circular, because you have to be able to hit all your points in a linear progression of here is what of cause and effect, while then also need to account for the exponential feeling of time, while then also be able to hit the circular idea in which time travel can then take this technology and put it back here, but then also you still need to be able to hit all these dots along the way in a linear fashion through cause and effect, right? Which is why time travel can't exist in short form, just from a philosophical and reasoning way. But yeah. This is also the book where we get a lot of talk about the learning to fly. You know, the knack is throwing yourself at the ground and missing, right? Which is a fun little thing of like inherently a concept of inevitability. And if you can distract yourself from inevitability, even if you're already towards it, then fun, crazy, amazing things can happen, right? Like flying, somehow being able to miss the ground, right? Or, you know, throughout the story, there is an inevitability that the crickets will destroy the universe, and it is only in the last possible seconds that there is some sort of thought that this is actually the crickets that want this. This is a supercomputer that existed at one point that wants this and has been tricking them, or, you know, raising this race of people to do this. And then eventually tries to get Arthur Dent to do it in the last second, right? But it's through this idea of screw the inevitable. There's this one last thing that we can try that then gets us to our goal, much like in flying, where it's a one last second, oh wait, but there's this, that eventually gets us to where we need to go. And that is Life, Universe, and Everything. It's only 180 pages, and I think I spent the most time talking about this one, but that's that.